Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Expedition Dogman. My name's Jamie. I'll be your host for this evening. Now, just before we start tonight's upload, there's something I wish to talk to you about. Thank you to everybody who's subscribed. We've gone over the 600 mark, we're doing well. I'd love to reach 1,000 by the end of this year if possible. But this brings me to what I want to talk about. At the minute, there's not a lot of Dogman related content going on over here in the UK. And things are getting harder to find. I did post on my community page a while back now about splitting the channel into two, into covering the paranormal as well as the dogmen. And at the moment, I feel as though this channel's at a crossroads, to be quite honest. And looking at how the channel's performing, we're at an all-time low, which is a shame. This is why I cannot stress enough. It is important to share this channel out to your friends, because the more you do, the more the algorithm likes it, and the more we can get the truth out there. But I can't do this alone, and I'm calling out to every one of you to please try and help. Also, I'll put up another vote in the community tab at some point today about looking into the paranormal aspects of the world and potentially branching off. But that's enough of that. And let's get on to what I wanted to talk about tonight. Something has come to my attention that is going on over here in the UK, especially near to where I live. Now, throughout this channel, I've mentioned about Barmston Drain and how dogmen don't just live on their own. I've also mentioned about an incident that happened to me near Anlaby Road, which is of course in Hull. And I was digging through the Hull Daily Mail. I will leave a link to this article within the description of the video for you to read about yourselves. Now, in the River Humber, there is something known as Reed's Island, which nowadays is a sinking island, and obviously, with the River Humber being a tidal river, it comes up, depending when the tide's out or in. You see where I'm going from with this? Now, according to the history of the place, there is a werewolf living there, and this is known as the werewolf of Reed's Island. I'll read it out in a minute, but we all know my personal view on werewolves and how they don't exist. Not in the manner of respect as to what Hollywood and certain media outlets, shall we say, would anticipate them to be. And I do believe they are dogmen. Now, this links in, and as I go on about this, the penny starts to drop for me. You've got, near the River Humber, you've got an old quarry, which is nestled within the Humber Bridge Country Park. Now, to the locals, this is known as Little Switzerland, which is on the banks of the Humber, not very far, funnily enough, from where Reed's Island is. So it's curious to me that with the River Humber being a tidal river as it is whatever dogman that's living on this island taking refuge within the country park. To me, it's highly plausible because there has been reports of potential dogmen being sighted within the quarry of the country park, which would make sense as well. If we look at the flesh and blood aspect of this creature, of the dogman in general, they require three things: shelter, water, and food. I've mentioned this time and time again, but it keeps cropping up. And for it to be living in the country park makes sense. You've got the quarry. Well, the old quarry, it's no longer in use nowadays, but you've got caverns in there. Can easily hide out. Water source, it's got the best water source you could hope for. It's got the River Humber, so water's not an issue. Food-wise, well, fishes. They swim up and down the Humber as they please. Nice spot fishing on a night time for a dogman, if you ask me. And also within the country park, you've got God knows what wildlife, birds, rabbits, things like that. So it's highly plausible that there is something living there. Now, I bet you're thinking, well, Jamie, how does this link to what you saw? Well, weirdly enough, I'm not going to recount the full encounter again because it's on the channel, to be honest. But I saw what looks like a dogman crossing from Dog Park, heading towards the Humber. Now, when I first looked at Reed Island, and then started to hear reports of potential dogmen being spotted within little Switzerland, shall we say, I thought to myself, well, hang about. What if this dogman that I saw was the notorious dogman of Reed's Island? It's plausible due to the fact of where this dogman was heading. And I mentioned, I can't remember which video it was in, but I did mention about the old stinker and the beast of Barnston Drain, and how I believe that within the Pennines, obviously we've got our own version of the Bermuda Triangle, which is the Wald-Newton Triangle. It's plausible then to suggest that there was a pack of dogmen living within the area. Is it a case then that the breeding ground is bigger than we first thought? Is it a case of it goes all the way from Barnston Drain down to the Humber? There was even a report a couple of years back about a potential dogman being spotted near Humberside Airport, which, for those of you that are not aware, you've got the River Humber, you've got Lincolnshire, and you've got East Yorkshire on either side. Lincolnshire to the south, East Yorkshire to the north. Humberside Airport resides within northern Lincolnshire, which is to the south of the Humber. Now, a couple of paranormal people were travelling home past Humberside Airport. I will mention this one because I actually spoke to them about it. I reached out to them when I saw something in the Hull Daily Mail about it. It's surprising, to be honest, what gets linked into the Hull Daily Mail about werewolves. There seems to be spikes, but that's beside the point. So they told me they was coming home one night past Humberside Airport, and opposite Humberside Airport, you've got farm and a reservoir, and they saw this 7-foot shadow leg it across the road. Now, unfortunately, it was too dark that particular night for them to do any sort of research into what it was, so they left it. But, saying that, they came back the very next day to the exact spot where they saw whatever it was. Pardon me. And what they found was bushes trampled down. Now, normally with bushes, if anything runs through a bush, due to the way physics work in this world, as we know it, the bush will go straight back up. It's like if a human, for example, decided to go running through the bushes, yeah, it might go down a bit, but it'd spring back up. Whatever this creature was big enough to trample it and made sure it stayed squashed down. Now, if you look at the reports of the weight and the height of dogmen, and how they love bushes and trees, it is plausible to think that one of these creatures could be strong enough to actually, trample a bush. And what seems to me the most strangest part about all of this is what Humberside Airport's about 15 miles away from the Humber Bridge. Reed Island is to the west of the Humber Bridge. Is it plausible to think that this particular dogman, we know they can travel roughly about 30 miles in a day, give or take. Is it plausible to think then that certain parts of northern Lincolnshire and certain parts of East Yorkshire, within a 30-mile radius of pinpointing exactly where Reed Island is the hunting grounds of this particular dogman? Take into a fact that the Pennines and the Yorkshire Wolds are not far away. The Yorkshire Wolds are obviously closer than the Pennines, but is it plausible to think then that the nesting area, well, one of the major nesting grounds of the UK, is actually bigger than we thought? Because obviously you've got the Flixton Werewolf to the north, which runs into the Pennines, well, not into the Pennines, into the Wolds. You've got the Beast of Barnston Drain, which is on the edge of Hull, in a little town called Beverley. Please check the channel, we've covered this numerous times. But that circumference is a bit further. You see where I'm going with this? This is like a half circle radius. Now, if we take into consideration of a potential dogman living near the Humber Bridge, that pushes then the radius even further out into another county. So, if you add all of these areas together, this is just my local area, and there is reports coming in of Reed Island, of Babston Drain, and obviously further into North Yorkshire you've got what's termed as the Flixton werewolf. And like I always say, I don't believe werewolves truly exist. Not in the form as what they do. If you want to find out my true thoughts on it, please check out on my channel Werewolves Are Not What You Think. I covered this early on to give you a true indication of what I believe they are. Now, give me 1 second, I'll just pull up the post in the Hull Daily Mail. You've got, this is in the news, this was put out last year at 5 o'clock in the morning, 22nd of May 2022. Rats, rockets, and a werewolf. The strange history of Reed's Island in the River Humber. I'll put a picture actually within the video showing where Reed's Island is. At some point. It's one of the loneliest spots in the entire Humber region, separated from the mainland by treacherous channels of fast-flowing water. Today, Reed's Island is an isolated nature reserve. Right, I'm just going to stop there. Nature reserve. Wildlife. There we go. We found a food source which is surrounded by water. The only problem is no shelter. But like I said earlier in this video, you've got the country park, also known as Little Switzerland, which has got shelter. Right, carrying on. For the best part of 2 centuries, however, this flood-prone island in the Humber estuary was valuable farmland considered well worth protecting from the shifting tides of the river. Well, it's a tidal river, tides change. Right, it was home at times to farmers and their families who tended to the cattle and later deer that roamed 500 acres of their richest grazing land in the country. Deer, funnily enough, is a favourite of dogmen. Farms, quite often do we hear of dogmen going to farms. Now the tides have won and Reed's Island has been abandoned, at least for now. But from shipwrecks to German prisoners, to even bizarre tales of a ghost and a cannibal werewolf, its history continues to intrigue. Now this is where I first found out about the story. I was on the Hull Daily Mail website one day, and they were talking about phantom figures being spotted on the Humber. And within that article was a link to the wealth of Reed's Island. And this is where I started to dig. Right. It is believed that Reed's Island, which lies between South Ferriby and North Ferriby, grew out of a sandbank called Old Warp or Pudding Pie Sand. Now, to give you a bit more context to the area, underneath the River Humber, it is notorious for sandbanks, and when the tide is out, you can see them. Now, to give you a lay of the land, you've got the Humber Bridge crossing the Humber between East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire, and just to the west, you've got North Ferriby, and then obviously in Lincolnshire, you've got South Ferriby. It's literally 2 miles away from the bridge, going west, and in the middle of the Humber is where this sandbank known as Reed's Island is located. By the late 18th century, grass was seen growing on the sands, and the farmers began to use it for grazing the animals. 2 ships were said to have been sunk deliberately to help reclaim the land, and by the late 19th century it measured almost 500 acres. That's massive. Reed's Island takes its name Dickie Reed of Barton upon Staver, Northern Lancashire. In the 1840s he built sea walls to enclose an area of 96 acres, and then created dikes, catch, water drains and ponds. He built a log hut for a herdsman who lived on the island. Right, 1 second. In 1841, local newspapers described steamships, and local, 1 minute, it's playing up, hate the adverts on this, right, bear with, sorry about this. In 1841, local newspapers described steamships and local dignitaries visiting the island, which was covered with a fine crop of grass, where about 100 head of cattle are already feeding, where nothing but fish is fed before. The reports added, there is as yet but one house, the occupier, which is the person appointed to look after the rest of the inhabitants. 3 years later, Dickie Reed's son tragically died while travelling to the island with 2 companions. He drowned when their boat capsized in strong winds. Despite Reed's efforts, his island remained vulnerable to flooding. In 1845, about 60 sheep drowned when the land was overcome by an exceptional high tide. That's just the basics. We're not going to go into the rat invasion because that's not necessary. Right, this is the part that's important to me. The legend of the Reed's Island werewolf. The most bizarre tale of Reed's Island was uncovered by Daniel Codd, a local historian. In his book, Mysterious Lincolnshire, I will post a description to that, well, a link to that in the description if I can find it. I'll do some digging while we're editing. He tells the story of a vagabond who lived on Reed's Island and made his living as a ferryman. Now, I'll just stop that there a minute to give you a bit more context of the history of the area. Now, before the Humber Bridge, there was only one way across the river, and that was ferries. That stopped in like the 1970s/1980s. I can't remember because it was before I was born. I always remember the Humber Bridge, but my grandparents and my mum and dad always remember the steam ferries that used to travel between Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. So it makes sense that whoever this was living on the island made a living as a ferryman, because that way it's an income. According to the story, many people went missing in the area, and when the authorities investigated, they found piles of skeletons and bones on the island. The vagabond was then said to have transformed into a howling werewolf who was dragged away and hanged. The story was said to have happened about 400 years ago. One former resident of the island remembers hearing tales of a ghost who haunted the island but never saw it himself. Les Burbidge, who lived on Reed's Island in the 1980s, added, "You always felt as if there was someone not too far away, and it was a bit scary." Right, let's talk about this. They're saying they saw somebody transform. They're still talking about werewolves and the modern Hollywood description of seeing somebody transform. As we know through clinical lycanthropy, people don't physically transform. And as I've mentioned earlier in this video, it's potential that it was a dogman that was living there, and that people saw somebody go into the house and whatever it was living in the area, and they saw that and they put 2 and 2 together. It's plausible. Or is it not a dogman? Is it more? Is it a shapeshifter that was living on the island? I think without doing investigations into Little Switzerland and into that area, it's going to be very hard to say as to exactly what it is. But personally, as we all know my view on werewolves, I'm very sceptical to say that this was a werewolf. I don't honestly believe it was. Potentially it could have been a dogman, due to the types of reports that are coming out of the country park. Or is it a case this person was never hanged and they used that as the government cover-up of the local council to say that, right, we're going to place the blame on this because we know exactly what this is and we don't want the public getting hold of that information? That's a plausible explanation as to potentially what has gone on. But without speaking to the historians and getting their viewpoints on it, it's going to be very difficult to pinpoint it. So I'll give you my personal thoughts on what it is, but we'll leave this to an open-ended case at the minute until more information becomes apparent. Personally, due to the type of area that we're in, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, about how I believe this local area is a dogman nesting ground, I think it's highly plausible that the werewolf of Reed's Island is none other than the dogman of Reed's Island. But like I said, we're going to have to look more into this one. Yes, personally I think I've opened and closed the case on Barnston Drain due to digging around, putting two and two together, looking at eyewitness reports and actually going out there myself and finding evidence. I think in the months to come we're going to have to go down to Little Switzerland and have a look. I will put that on my list to do. But guys, just to go back to what I was saying about where the channels are at the minute, if you lot would love for the Dogman content to continue, if any of you out there have had encounters, because I think this is where we need to be going with this channel now, if we want it to stay Dogman related, to eyewitness reports, please do get in touch. I did notice in the comments the other day somebody came from Jeffrey and Only because it was sent to the channel because they're looking into attacks within the UK. Guys, if you want to speak to me about anything Dogman related, the email address is expeditiondogman@gmail.com. That is the easiest way for you to get in touch with me, and we'll take it from there. Like I said, I'll put up a post within the communities tab. I implore every one of you to use it. I don't mean to sound preachy, but at the minute, this channel's at a crossroads, and I'd love for it to stay Dogman only. But as things stand, we might have to look more into the paranormal aspects of life to keep this channel going. So please do leave a comment. Please do like the video and share it to your friends. And if you're enjoying the content, if you're new here, please feel free to subscribe, because we're trying to hit 1,000 now by the end of this year. And as well, watch hours impact the channel massively, because we're getting there to unlocking paid content so we can start going out further afield. But unless we get the watch hours up, that ain't going to happen. So please do like, share, comment and subscribe. Please feel free to leave your comments and thoughts on the information provided in this video. And please do share it out to your friends. And until next time, my furry friends, be aware of the howl.